There are times when a person must find the ability to say to themselves, I am a person of value. And that value may come from the expression of their gifts, their service, their willingness to help other people. So I don't want to give anybody a prescription that there's only one way to feel that you are a valuable person. But I will say, you have to start by casting a vote for yourself. You have to be able to say in the quietness of your own heart, I am a person of value.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Sparks of Gratitude podcast. I am your host, Randy Sparks, and we've got a treat for you today. We have got internationally known speaker, author, coach, CEO, just a legend in the leadership world, Mr. Jim Huling. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you, sir. I've been literally waiting for weeks since we first had our conversation about doing this, and finally the day is here.
Ooh, I like how you say that. Well, Jim, you are my new friend, and everybody listening, he is about to be your new friend. Jim and I had the most wonderful conversation a few weeks ago, the first time we met. And after we were done with the conversation, both of us were sad that we hadn't pressed the record button because the way that conversation naturally progressed, it was everything. It was insight, it was personal stories, it was connection, it was advice, it was heart. And I believe we will have a taste of that today.
Yes, don't set the bar too high.
I'm putting all the pressure on you, Jim.
Well, we'll hope for the same magic though. But I have a friend who speaks in terms of human relations in frequencies, and she likes to use the metaphor that when two people who vibrate at the same frequency encounter each other, the harmony is immediate. And I think honestly, that's what we had, and we hope for that to resonate again today. A sort of an instantaneous mind, body, spirit connection that even though we've only been friends for a very short time, someday we'll be able to say for a very long time. But today, short time, it made us think and act like old friends would, and I think that's what we really hope to bring to this podcast today.
Ooh, I love that idea of those frequencies coming together and resonating and harmonizing. Could you talk to me about the meaning of that to you, about connection and resonance with people?
Well, and if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to offer thoughts in two dimensions.
Hey there, everyone. Did you know that beyond hosting the Sparks of Gratitude podcast, I am also an estate planning attorney, and I love gratitude, and my law firm is proud to sponsor this video. Since 2010, in my law practice, I have designed and delivered customized peace of mind with sophisticated estate planning made easy. So whether you need foundational estate planning, including revocable trusts, wills, powers of attorney, and healthcare directives, which is what most people need, or you might need advanced strategies such as irrevocable trust for asset protection or advanced estate tax planning, I am here to guide you every step of the way. Because at the end of the day, your peace of mind is my peace of mind. You can visit randallsparks.com and I can get started helping you plan for the future today. Now back to our podcast.
Not to stretch that metaphor too far. One dimension is the human to human dimension, where I think too often we underserve ourselves by imagining that the only communication we're actually having is the verbal one, like you and I are using words and the sounds of our voices at this moment. But when really human beings are constantly communicating on so many levels, whether it's me watching your facial expression and getting a sense of your emotional reaction to something that I might say, or whether you're engaged with me or whether you've drifted off or whether you're intensely emotional about something, all of that I can get from the visual. But even below that, and I don't want to be too far out there for your audience, but I think there is also a sort of a spiritual vibration that happens in such a way that people of like mind, of like heart, of like intention in the world, when we encounter each other, we kind of know each other, even if I don't know where you were born, or as people may not know that you're a classically trained rock and roll guitarist, or all the things that may be hidden secrets in our lives. We don't know all those things, but we, capital K, know each other in a way that lets us open our minds, open our hearts, let us communicate about real things in a real way. That's what you and I did the first time we met. And as you said, I think it was one of the most remarkable conversations I've ever been part of, and I'm very hopeful today will be part 2, of that. But I think this frequency idea is a powerful one when we think about we're always communicating really on 4 or 5 levels. It's not just about what we said, but it's about what we meant, about what we felt, about what we believed. All those levels, we're actually talking to each other all the time. And maybe by extension to all the thousands of people that will listen to this particular podcast.
I believe you that that's true, and not only because it sounds true, but because I've felt it. I've felt, when I connect with somebody new, when I feel the energy of that person. I mean, I've had guests on this podcast who talk about the measurable frequency of emotions, and that how this is really energy and motion in our body, and that we have different frequencies, and there's low and high frequency, and how can we move from a low frequency into a high frequency? What are the actions we can choose to take? How much control and intention can we put into that? And then what does that in turn attract? And then how does that move us forward? And so I love that you start the conversation that way.
And you use one of my very favorite words. We'll try not to overuse it today, but intentional, is for me has become such a meaningful word because in the world we live in today, it's just so easy to drift with the current. Let's go where the emotions are going. Let's go where the media is going. Let's go where the current thinking is going. It's just easy to be part of that flow. And the flow is not always bad. But when we go to another level, when we have clarity, let's say, around this is what I want to do with my life. This is the kind of impact I want to have. On a personal level, I might say this is the kind of spouse or father I want to be. This is the kind of teacher I want to be. I bring an intention to it. I go above the flow. And now I'm charting my own way. Now I'm navigating toward it. Randy, it's as though there was a lighthouse on the hill, and every day I'm just walking towards that lighthouse. I'm instead of drifting with something, I'm being called by something. I'm being drawn to something, which is this sense of what I came here to do, what my purpose is as an individual. And I think that's a powerful thing. And if you don't mind me adding one more thought on that, is that I remember the first time we spoke, I told you a very brief version of a very long story, which we won't tell today, about my own journey of starting life as a musician and then being a technologist and then being a CEO and then realizing one day that I really didn't want to do any of that. I wanted to be a teacher. I wanted to think of things that would help people and be able to articulate them or write them in a way that was impactful. And it pivoted my whole life toward that calling. And that pivot has made all the difference. Probably one of the reasons I got invited to this podcast today is because I made that pivot a number of years ago to go toward the thing that was calling me. So when we're talking about frequency and all those things, it seems so natural, doesn't it, to think, yes, then there's also a homing signal out there all the time that's pinging, for us to follow the leading toward what we were born to do, who we were born to be, how we can make our lives really something that mattered in the end. I think that homing signal is always being broadcast. And the intentionality to me relates to the willingness to listen to that homing signal and then instead of going this way, be able to go that way to go toward it. That's for me, a powerful metaphor for how to live a wonderful life and hopefully a life of no regrets and one of great purpose.
There are so many questions in there. One, let me jump in on this, is the awareness of that homing signal, that beacon that's calling. How have you and how do you coach people? You've written books about this, you coach people about this. How do you teach people, or how do you yourself have the awareness to be able to to see, hear, receive that homing signel
I'm so
and
glad you
know when to follow it?
Yeah, excuse me for interrupting. I'm so excited that you and I resonate, over that. Yeah. 'Cause, there's a very large philosophical debate that's been around as long as there have been human beings about whether we are truly the commanders of every action we take or whether we're predestined to do certain things. And frankly, I have no interest in that conversation whatsoever. I'm not being dismissive. It just doesn't call to me. What calls to me though is this idea that the best of both is when we feel a calling towards something vis-a-vis metaphor of the homing signal, pinging all the time. We feel called towards something, but the way in which we move toward it and the way in which we embody it is left up to us as individuals to choose based on what most resonates with us. And I think this is not too big of a stretch to say all of us are born with some gift, some basket of gifts, aren't we? Look, you have talent as a musician, you have talent as a speaker, you have talent as a lawyer, you have wonderful articulate ability to express yourself. The list of your gifts is quite long, but you get to choose how you deploy those gifts, in what way you use them. Same in some ways for me. So what I'm trying to say is really quite simple. I don't want to make it complicated. If you resonate with this idea that there is something that might be calling you, that you might have been gifted in order to do, some purpose that might be a thing that would be signature in your life, one of the things that at the end of your life, you'd be most grateful that you did, you pursued, you accomplished, then the freedom to pursue that and embody that in the way that feels right to you, that to me is the best of all worlds. It almost seems like a miraculous combination, to sort of be divinely called, but humanly free to choose our path to get to that calling. So I've overused this metaphor already today. I promised you I would. I love this idea, like there's a lighthouse on the hill. And each day I just walk towards that light. And if I do that, I have this inner peace that I'm on purpose. I'm on path. And I'm not trying to over religiousize this in any way. I'm really talking about it at this deep level of the human experience of you're either intentionally living a life towards some kind of purpose, or you're flowing with the stream of events and thoughts and energies that, are part of the world we live in. And I really do think the choice is that fundamental. I don't know if anybody in your audience will say, in the chat there, he's already oversimplified all of the universe rating. I don't know. It's possible, and it's possible that I am. I don't know. I tend to be a very simple person, but I do see this very simply, as an existential idea, but really simple. There's something I'm supposed to do. There's something I was gifted to be able to do. And there's something that I have the capacity, if I choose to do it, to be happy about the fact that I did it. That's a simple formula. And yet it marks the difference between a life sort of lived at random, maybe even a good life or a productive life, and a life that's lived, as so many people say today, on purpose. Now, does that make sense, Randy, the way I
I well, I love the conversation of living on purpose. I've the very first guest I had on this podcast was Dr. Paul Jenkins, and he wrote a book called Pathological Positivity. And, in his radio show and podcast and everything, and he taught it's called Live on Purpose. Right, and his whole message is that live on purpose. And so I resonate very deeply with this. The question I have for you, I've had moments in my life, and I'm sure I'm not unique, where I know that there's something calling to me. I know that there's some broader, more significant meaning, and purpose for me to aim toward. And if I closed my eyes and visualize what that is, I see something out there. Like this experience has literally happened to me. I'm describing myself specifically where I might be in some meditative state or, imagining and I'm seeing this future, but it's blurry. And so I know something's out there, but it's not in focus. And so how would you talk to somebody about that idea of knowing that there's a purpose out there waiting for them, but it's not quite in focus yet?
I love this question. You're so good too with the visual imagery of your words. That was beautifully asked. And and I like it because it brings me from the highly philosophical abstract to the concrete and the tactical, which is right where we all live, right? So what a great place to have to go to. Um, Typically, I can help a person refine that sense of calling. Sort of like, how you adjust a camera lens and you start a little bit, it eventually gets very, very sharp, sort of like that process. Don't invent the calling and never would want that responsibility, but I can help a person whose calling is blurry to sharpen the focus so that they might say, ah, that's what I'm supposed to be doing. And one of the most powerful ways to do that is by searching deep to find your own answers to four questions that are very, very simple, but when explored really deeply, they can be quite profound. And the first one is kind of interesting. If you do you mind if I just say all four of
I would love to hear all 4, and then we can dive into them a little.
of course, my friend, whatever you'd like to do would be wonderful. So the first one, instead of looking forward, the very first question asks us to look backward. So in the journey of our life, the very first question is, when have I felt full of purpose? Now, if you like shorthand, you could say purposeful, but I get a little more juice when I say, when in my life have I had a moment when I felt full of purpose? And when I ask a client this question, I'm not asking them for a broad answer. I don't want someone to say, yes, the fall of 1997 was an awesome time for me because it's so broad. It doesn't really help us. But what does help us is to be able to say, in the spring of 1997, I was asked to give a message to a group of people. I'd never done anything like that before. I was scared to death. I worked for several weeks to develop my message. On the morning I got up, my hands were shaking, my throat was dry. I thought about running away and not even showing up. But I went to the auditorium and I walked up on the stage. And from the moment I began speaking, something else took over. I have chill bumps just telling you the story because this is my story. This is one of the parts of my story. And so I began to speak and I began to teach and began to offer what I had. And without a consciousness of technique, I had a clarity of spirit that came through in that moment and made a tremendous impact on the people that were hearing me. I need to be really quick to say, I don't in this moment, nor do my clients have any sense that this was about them. It's not. It's about what came through them, not what came from them, right? So the power of that message. So step number one is to go back and identify in your life the moments like that, the moments when everything you just felt that you were being propelled by some kind of force, whatever it was. And by the way, it doesn't have to be that you won the Academy Award or you broke the land speed record. It's not like that. It can be a story that, on a particular day, one of my teammates was really struggling and I had some free time and I said, "Hey, if I stay late and we work on this together, we can get you all caught up." Maybe that was the moment. It could be. Or I baked an extra loaf of bread for a neighbor and when I took it, I realized no one had visited her for months. It can be anything like that. But the key is what are the moments in my life so far in which I have felt filled with purpose? And Randy, at the risk of this being a little too long, I could say really quickly, I have a shorthand that I've developed because, I mostly work with business leaders who are in a hurry to do almost everything. So I have a shorthand version. I'll just say it real fast and then it'll be on the podcast for anyone who wants it. It consists of 5 rights. So it's a moment in my life in which I'm going to use my fingers to illustrate, Randy, in which I was the right person doing the right thing in the right way for the right reasons with the right people. Now, when I can check 4 or 5 of those boxes against a memory I've got, it's pretty likely one of those purpose-filled moments. And when I inventory those moments, the most amazing thing is that those moments are filled with clues about what I'm supposed to be doing. It's almost as though, you know, the universe has been sending me little cryptic messages saying, "Hey, Jim, this is it. This is what you're supposed. That's why you feel so great right now." But I miss the signal sometimes. So by going back and inventorying them, I can get this picture of what was I doing? Who was I doing it with? How was I doing it? Why was I doing it? And inside of that can be this incredible set of clues that will, by looking backward, that will help me begin to design how I want to move forward. I told you this the first time we ever met, and I'll finish this first point with that is to say, I did this exercise for myself at the height of my professional career. I'd been a CEO for over a decade. I'd experienced a lot of success, and I'm grateful for that success. I still think it was one of the most wonderful times of my life. But I had reached a point where I felt incredibly burned out. My expression I used with you the other day is I felt hollowed out from the inside because I was giving tremendously but not being fulfilled in return by what I was doing with my life. So I did this very exercise and I ended up with 15 of these moments. And not one of those moments was as being a CEO. I've been a CEO for a decade, but of my 15 best moments, not one of them was in that role. If you want to talk about a blinding flash of the obvious, that's I had my notes about that. And so I made a decision, to pivot. And of course, 11 of the 15 moments, I was speaking, I was teaching, I was writing, I was communicating something I thought would help to a group of other people. So I've gone on just a bit long, but I thought maybe people in your podcast would like to know, what that was. I'll be more brief with the three other questions, and you jump in anywhere that you have a question.
Hey, we have time. I'm really curious about the engaging in these 4 questions because 'cause it'll be so valuable to me. I will go through this exercise, and I'm certain other people will wanna hear it too.
That'll be our gift back to everybody who listens to us from this time we're spending.
Sorry, we're giving everybody homework, but it'll change your life.
Yeah, it'll be worth it. You'll be really glad you did it. So question one is in hindsight, really quite simple. When have I felt full of purpose? And what can those moments teach me about how to go forward? That's number one. The second question is a little bit different because I refer to it as the humility question. Not all people take this question in the same way, but the question itself is, who do I feel most called to help? Or in some vernaculars, we might say, who do I feel most called to serve? In other words, if we build a life purpose that's only about us, then the depth of that purpose will be actually quite shallow because we're doing something on purpose, but it's only being done to serve ourselves. And while that in and of itself is not terrible, it's so limited. So this second question stretches open the windshield of our mind to say, as I pursue this vision, toward whom am I focused? Am I oriented? For example, some people go through this exercise with me and discover that they really love working with young people. Other people would say that's the last group I want to work with, but some people truly find in their heart that what lights them up is to help people at a very early point in their life and their career so that the impact they have lasts for decade upon on decade. Other people are quite the opposite. I was working with a person yesterday who discovered that what she really loves is working with people at midlife, people who have had a great life and now they're say 50 years old or something like that. And they're like, okay, now I've achieved everything I wanted to. What do I do now? Those people, she has this heart to say, let's design the second half of your life in a way that's better than the first half of your life. So, second question is, who do I most want to help? Who do I most want to serve as I fulfill my purpose? Really, really powerful question. Third question is, what gifts do I bring? What gifts do I bring? It's not hard for everybody to acknowledge that not all of us are good at all things. That's a pretty easy. I'm
Well,
certainly
that's certain.
yes. Well, when I was listening to the list of all the things you've done and all of your attributes, I did a little self inventory and I came up quite short, maybe. So you're quite a remarkable person to compare to. But the idea is, what gifts do I bring? So in my case, I have certain gifts, maybe speaking or communicating or some in some ways writing are gifts that I was given. And then there are many other gifts. Just totally wasn't given those gifts. So by inventorying what they are, it's sort of like I can lay them all on the table and say, all right, here are the tools I've been given to work with. And if there are some tools that I'm expert at, beautiful. I'm ready to deploy those tools today. There may be other tools that I've been given a raw talent in, but I need to invest time. I need to work to enable that gift to be fully impactful for me as I go out into the world. Either way, though, the third question is, what gifts do I bring to the pursuit of my purpose? Really powerful question. Can take a few days to ponder. And then last of all, mercifully for you and all of your listeners, the fourth question, which I find to be the most powerful, once you've done the first three, is what impact do I want to have? What impact do I want to have? And I'm always mindful of this wonderful quote, which Randy, I always seem to get one word wrong in. I have to try to get that right this time. But Steve Jobs had this quote about live your life in such a way that you make a dent in the universe. I think I spoke to you about this the other day. I love this idea. I love the visual of standing back from my life one day and saying, wow, you see that dent? Andy, you see that dent right there? That's me. I did that right there. That's the difference I made. I want that. So I love this fourth question. What impact do I want to have when I'm finished and gone and other people are standing around perhaps chatting about my life or my impact? What do I want them to be able to say? Was I a great friend? Was I a great teacher? Did I make time for people who needed me? Did I have a compassionate heart? Was I generous and with the resources I had available? I don't know. But I need to be clear about what impact I want to have in order to have that impact instead of four or five others, instead of it being random, it's a very back to the word you and I love, an intentional process. So those four questions. When have I felt purposeful? Who am I here to serve? What gifts do I bring? And what impact do I want to leave? Those four questions, when approached very thoughtfully, will yield answers that will give you a transformative recipe for crafting the remaining days of your life in an intentional way.
Wow, thank you very much for that. And it seems like you are right that those questions will help give somebody the autofocus to that lens and bring into clarity what might be calling to them, what that purpose may actually be. They uncover it. I like how you said that in the very first question to remember a moment when one felt the most right. The word remember keeps calling to me lately. In fact, for two reasons. One, because I think the exercise of remembering the question that you ask calls someone to remember that, and now I can look at it very differently instead of being in the middle of the experience. Now I can analyze it from all angles of it, and I can learn from it, learn who it impacted, what impact it had since then, who was involved, and then I can recreate or become something better intentionally. There's your word intention. But I also believe that there's a more eternal view of the word remember, where I've heard people say that I believe that I occupy a physical form on this earth, but that my soul, my spirit that occupies this body is not confined to this timeline or this dimension, but that I have an eternal soul created by God that occupies this form. And I am in a process of continually remembering, right? And every now and again I have something peeled away so that this dumb, bag of meat can can remember what this holy soul created by God has already known. And this is why I believe that things when I meet somebody and I feel connected, or when I hear something and I just feel that it's true, it's because I'm remembering something that is a true principle.
And it confirms, in a sense, that it existed before you thought of it. That you
Mm.
did it at one time and you may have forgotten, therefore you can remember it. I love that. And I thought for a moment you might even add in the ancient definition, remember, actually has that connotation to stitch back together. So for me, and maybe I'm glomming on too much to the beautiful thought you just gave, but since I've started, I'll go ahead and finish that maybe I came here whole, and in the process of living, my parts have sort of been separated, and the remembering, to put the pieces back together is the stitching back together into a whole intention and purpose as a human being to do a certain thing. Maybe that's the prerequisite for living a great life, living a life on purpose is this remembering of my component parts back into, the whole. I don't know. Perhaps we're using this metaphor too often, but it sure is serving us, isn't it? In this
Oh,
one.
I love the metaphor, and it actually reminds me of some. I want to jump from where we have just left off to kind of the next concept, is because the idea of uncovering and bringing into focus this purpose. Okay, well, one of the things that might have been dismembered or fractured or torn, like through society and culture, through my life, I am taught to fear. I am taught that certain things are dangerous or so on. For me, one of the biggest roadblocks for stepping towards purpose, or anything for that matter, is I'm stepping into something I've never done, and I don't know what's on the other side of this wall right here. And so when I'm stepping into this new world, I feel like I am not worthy, like I'm not qualified. I have fears of the unknown. And so, in spite of purpose, in fact, when you described your specific example of when you felt the most alive and purposeful and all of that, it was your experience and you were getting chills. You sounded terrified. So, how do you grapple with and how do you teach people to step into fear or embrace their relationship with fear and imposter syndrome?
I mean, I'm so glad you brought this up, and I think imposter syndrome we clearly have not conquered it because the subject itself grows larger and larger among the minds and hearts of people who talk about things like we're talking about today, and so that's a reflection, I think, where the greatest need is, and clearly this is a great need, and I have a little bit of a unique perspective on this. Is that so many people say I'm going to do something. I'm not really qualified to do it, or at least I have voices in my head telling me I'm not really qualified to do it. And therefore, by doing it anyway, I'm an imposter. And for me, that language is too imprecise. For me, the language is I'm not faking, I'm becoming. I'm just not finished yet. So if I'm a young person, I offer the opportunity to speak to an important audience, and I've never given a speech before. By walking to the podium and saying, "Good morning, everyone. I'm Jim, and I'd like to talk to you today about this." I'm not faking being a world-class speaker. I'm in the process of becoming a speaker. So my becoming, my emerging as that takes away all the pressure that I would normally deduce made me an imposter. You can't be an imposter if there's no presumption that you're already an expert. If you're not pretending you're an expert, there's no fear of being called an imposter because you're being very open with where you are. Now, I'm not saying you hire a billboard on the side of the highway and say Jim's faking it for a while now. I'm not saying that, but I am saying in the way you conduct yourself, in the way you present yourself, and in the tone and the type of message you deliver in this example that I've chosen, you acknowledge that I'm not where I want to finish, but I'm not where I started either. I am in the process of becoming. And I think that takes away some of it. The only other thought I like to put out there, because I can't wait to hear what you will say back to me, is I have a wonderful client who has this vivid imagination. So an ability to articulate everyday concepts in the most colorful way. She certainly should be writing stories for Netflix or something of that like. But she said to me the other day, she's actually a corporate executive, if you can imagine, but said to me the other day, "I don't have a voice in my head, Jim." I thought, wow, great. Then she said, "No, I have a committee." You know, she said, "In order for us to decide anything," now catch the language, the plural. "In order for us to decide anything, I have to call a meeting of the entire board of directors, and we have to have this long dialogue and debate." And I mean, really, I've never heard anybody use this metaphor this way. So I said very innocently, I said, "Well, who are all those people?" And she literally could list them one by one by one by one. There were 9 people in her head. And as we worked with it, we traced the legacy of those people all the way back to where they started. So one was her high school athletics coach who was really critical and was always telling her, "You'll never make it." Another one was a college professor who literally said, "I don't think I've ever taught anyone with less imagination than you." Good grief, who would say that to another human being? But he lives in her head now rent free, and every time they call a meeting of the board, his voice pops up and says, "Well, I've never met anyone anymore." In other words, her expression was profoundly impactful. "I don't have a voice in my head, Jim, I have a committee in my head." Well, what we did was we took each voice, we gave it a name, we traced its history so we knew its origin point, and then we decided to give it an honorable discharge from her life. So for the high school athletics coach, we said, Thank you. You've served us well. You've pushed us for athletic excellence to the greatest extent you could, and your services are no longer needed. You are hereby discharged." And this may sound crazy, but we just said it out loud. We said out loud to the voice in her head. So one by one by one, we plucked those voices out of her mind. to the point where when we got to the end, 2 things were true. One, if she ever needed one of those voices, she could still call upon it. She could still say, to any part of herself, "Gosh, what do you think I should do?" But the second and most important is those voices were not invited unless they were called upon. So in other words, they were instructed to be quiet unless they were called upon. So I realize this is a rich metaphor, but it is also a practical application of how to get rid of all the things that cumulatively we label in the most broad way imposter syndrome. Usually, imposter syndrome is a committee in our heads, and by separating them and tracing their origins and then honorably discharging them, we can actually be free of all those voices that hold us back and make us feel like we're faking.
Wow, I've never heard it that way. I'm currently reading a book called The Untethered Soul by Michael Singer, if you've ever read it.
Read it several times. Powerful.
So, he talks about the concept of the voice in your head, and he calls it the roommate.
Yes.
And everybody listening, you have a voice in your head who's probably speaking to you right now. As you're listening to this, you got a voice in your head talking to you about saying something about, judgment to this conversation, or did you leave the stove on, or anything. So there's this voice in your head. But wow, what an interesting concept that she didn't have a voice in her head. She had a whole bunch of roommates,
Yes,
not
we have to
just
call a meeting.
the one.
Isn't about what's for lunch. We have to call a meeting.
Yeah.
But either way, we both said the same thing in beautifully different ways, but it's only slightly different. That through introspection and through a sort of sincere questioning, rather than being a victim of all the voices, we take command of that team of voices. And we might, as we say, still call on them at some point, but otherwise, we discharge you from your day to day requirement to watch over us and give us advice all day. We relieve you of that responsibility as of today.
The depth of awareness that's required to even have that conversation is so important. And so what I love about you, Jim, is your ability to uncover that with people and ask them the questions to bring to someone's awareness their own consciousness. And 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 to me, that is what unlocks the capacity to then be intentional.
I said to you the first day we met that I really felt that coaching, and particularly I do executive coaching. So I'm with people who, by all standards of the world, have arrived. They're not supposed to have any issues, which is sort of a prison they have to live in themselves. So never having vulnerability. But I see that work as very spiritual work. And when a person who is in my coaching setting is willing to open themselves enough to say, "Here's where I'm struggling." I hope no one in your audience would mind if I say it's a holy moment for me. That's a sacred moment where I've been given a trust now that has to be, it's this precious thing that I have to hold in my hands and do good work with. So I really see it that way. And for anybody who doesn't know me, who's listening to this podcast, I'm not elevating myself when I say that at all. I'm elevating the power of the moment and the sacred responsibility when another person has made themselves vulnerable with you or in your presence so that you can help them. That's a calling. And I feel I have that calling. And so I'm grateful for it, and I'm grateful that you acknowledged it the way you did. Thank you. I'm very honored by that.
So on that note, I believe I certainly, and I imagine everybody has felt lonely, has felt unseen, has felt unheard, and to find the moment, that sacred space with another, whether that's with a higher power or with an individual or with a group, a support group, to have that conversation, to crack their heart open and then feel, one of my friends always quotes, let me make sure I get it right. That which is most personal is most universal. I don't remember who this quote is from or if it's, but, the idea is that I feel sometimes that my unique brand of suffering is so personal and unique to me. But then when I reveal this in a moment with someone else or with a group, suddenly another says, wow, I feel just the same. And all of a sudden, like, whoa, what I thought was only mine, I am part of a club with people who can empathize and understand me. And so having the courage to open my heart for that. You know, Brene Brown, this is her whole idea of having the courage to have that vulnerability. So, um, this comes down to the child who feels alone to the CEO of a company who's, quote, "arrived." So, um, I hear many people say, many CEO friends and so on, that being a CEO, that is a lonely place.
It's a very lonely place, and, I have a special place in my heart for people. I've been a CEO for quite a long time, and then now I work a lot with CEOs, and I think they have a particular challenge in that to have questions, to have doubts, to say, "We have a problem and I don't know the answer," or "I'm uncertain which way we should go," to even allow that to be expressed is is counted as a weakness when it should be counted as a strength. I don't know of anything that takes more courage in the workplace than to be a leader and say, I have no idea what we should do. Does anyone have an idea? That takes so much courage. But then I love what you said a moment before, because I too believe in the universality of our open hearts. That anytime we feel isolated, one antidote to that is to have the courage in the right moment, in the right place with the right people, all make good choices, to be able to say, here's where I am. Because in that moment, we very likely, I've heard it said before, Randy, the greatest response to a truth well spoken is a chorus of me too.
Mm.
Oh, me too. Oh, me too, And the moment you hear that, you're not alone. But until you say your truth, you feel alone. And I think that's a real problem with the and if you don't mind, I'll hook it in just for a second to the place where I spend so much of my time is with people in leadership roles of all kinds, but predominantly in business roles. I think everybody who works for us or everyone who follows a leader lives every day of their life with two questions that they'd like to have answered before they go home for the evening. And one of them is, am I doing something that matters? And the second one is, does anybody care? And I've spent a lot of time thinking about these two questions. I think I've got them to where, for me, that feels like a great truth. Am I doing something that matters? Or have I navigated somehow my way into the corner of meaningless activities for which I can be paid? Trading my hours for dollars, but nothing more than a transaction. So am I doing something that matters? But the second question is the one that literally breaks my heart, that people could follow leaders like you and me and not be sure of the answer. Does anybody care? Does anybody really care? I worked really hard today. I got the report out on time. I did a beautiful job. I packaged it. I bound it in the right format. I had it on the boss's desk by 4:59 p.m., which is what had been asked of me. I did it. And then in that moment to say, does anybody care? That's hard. That breaks my heart. So when I'm talking to senior leaders, grizzled old senior leaders like me, even, to say, you cannot forget this. Yes, you have to achieve a goal. Yes, you have to produce a business result. Yes, you have to lead with integrity and authenticity and skill. Yes, of course. That was all part of the job when you took it. But what you may not have thought about is the moment you became in charge, you had to think about people who were your charge. And those people you hold in your hands in terms of their care and their well-being and their sense of making a contribution. So to think about these two questions as a CEO, I was often finding myself trying to answer them in ways that people could hear, of yes, you are doing something that's important. And here's why. And here's how what you're doing connects to the larger purpose of our whole company and how lives are different and the world is different by what you do. Thank you. And then by expressing it in that way to answer the second question almost automatically, and I really care. I really appreciate it. You're one of your signature topics is gratitude. I'm really grateful for what you do. These are not hard things. This is not the quantum physics of running a business. These are easy things. But when we're willing to do them, they are unquestionably, in my experience, the most powerful things we do as a leader. And what comes from that is a team of people who are not only engaged, but they're nourished. They're whole in a sense. They are able to bring their whole selves to the work that's at hand for the day and to care about what they're doing. And when we are absent those things, it's like a person in the desert with no water. They can only survive so long.
And how do we become grateful, and how do we then show appreciation to people around us?
Yeah. And you and I in a format like this, we can do a good job of giving illustrative answers, but that might be encyclopedic, the ways in which we could do it. But I think the two things I've touched on are a good place to start. Do you notice and do you express? So first of all, you have to notice. If you don't notice, you can't express, or else you just send out "Great job today, everybody" messages all over the place. Those are actually are counter to what we're talking about. So you first have to notice, which means you have to pay attention. You have to pay attention. You can't take it for granted that someone did something to the very best of their ability in exactly the time frame you asked them to do it in and got the job done. You can't say thanks. Now, I'm not saying you have to give a 20-minute glowing testimonial every time somebody does something in your business. No business could run that way. But I am saying if you're oblivious, if you take it for granted, then you'll never get the second part because you'll never have the stimulus that will create the response of, "I really appreciate that. Hey, Randy, you did an amazing job on that report. I think it might be one of the best reports anybody's ever written in this team. And I'm going to use it as an example for all the reports I write from now on because I think you did such a great job. I don't have time to say that to you. What am I doing with my time? I don't have time to do that because you leave that conversation feeling known and valued. And you give a group of human beings the feeling that they are known and valued, and they can do anything.
And you are so right, Jim, that it doesn't take time. I mean, our good friends out there, Chester Elton and Adrian Gostick have done all the research on this in leadership with the power of gratitude in leadership. They wrote a book on it called Leading with Gratitude, but it's just full of data, thousands and thousands of now my words fail me. But anyway, they've got a lot of data on this. It's thousands um and people are starving to feel appreciated. And I who doesn't know that what that feeling feels like? And so that this is what my experience has been, is that gratitude, like many things, is a practice. And practicing gratitude, like intentionally, we're back to your word of being intentional and saying, all right, well, this might feel a little bit mechanical, but if I keep an intentional daily gratitude practice, I am training my mind and my heart to notice and pay attention.
Any must.
That right, to for that which I'm grateful, but then all of a sudden, then I will see it when it comes. And then if I have somebody on my staff or on my team or my wife or my child or you who decides to share your time with me today, I'm deeply grateful for this conversation. And when I can receive listen to this. What's the difference between thank you everybody for all your hard work today? It's like, okay, well, yeah, that is gratitude, and I might actually mean it. But what if I say, Jim, thank you so much for showing up early today, and thank you for thinking in advance that you knew this person was going to show up and that I would need to have this prepared beforehand, and you brought that to me just so that you knew I wouldn't forget it. That was so thoughtful, like specific and sincere message of appreciation. That changes everything because then people know that they were noticed.
And Randy, the most common response to an example like that is, "Oh, Jim, I don't have to. I got a company to lead. I don't have time to do all that. And if I start doing all that, that's all I'll do. And my whole day I won't be." And it's just not the truth. It's a weak excuse because we're not asking you to compliment or recognize every person on every day. But we are asking you when someone has done something worthy of recognition, that you actually do it in a way that makes a difference. And that's really the difference. I like to draw the distinction between praise and recognition. And I think praise is like, "Hey, great, Randy, great job." Great job. Did a great job. Cool. Nothing. Means nothing. Maybe it means a little something. I don't know, but it's almost immaterial. As opposed to the example you just gave. Your example was specific. It was clear. It was heartfelt. You explained why it mattered. And you ended in in an expression of gratitude, not only for what the person did, but for who they are. You see, praise says you did something good. Recognition says you are something good.
Maybe we can end with this line of thought, but this line of thought, I think we could take, multi-series podcast to have this conversation. But you said instead of you did something good to you are something good. I've been thinking a lot about my individual value and who I am. Who am I? Who am I really? And what's my value? And so when you said that you are valuable, it's about who they are. So what do you have, and what's been your thought process in your life on I am like
I think it's a wonderful question. And if I come back to you to close the first thought and then answer your question faithfully, it's I think the difference between praise and recognition, as we said, you did something valuable or you are valuable. That's two different things. And I think leaders will even be confused listening to our podcast. They'll want to think about this a little more. But with a little bit of exploration, it's not hard to understand the difference. But the closing comment of that in my lexicon is valued people produce value. And for me, this is in a business. This is where it all comes together. So before I answer your final question, this is this full cycle of business. So you did something valuable. That's great. I can acknowledge that. But I don't want to make the difference of saying you're only valuable when you do something great. You are valuable. You are valued. In other words, am I doing work that matters? And does anybody care? I'm answering those two questions. But the way we reconcile that in the framework of a business is that valued people produce value. The largest hotel company in the world, the Marriott Corporation, from day one has been run by a single mantra, which is we take care of our people will take care of the guests. And for 40 years, they've been the largest hotel company in the world, and in my opinion, the best. And their simple admonition to every employee is we take care of you, you take care of the guests. That's a beautifully spiritual, grounded way of messaging to a workforce how we all operate in this community together. So I don't know if that doesn't fully answer your question, but it gets us a little closer in this dialogue, doesn't it, to touching on the thing that matters. And then the thing you asked me, which is deep for me, we just say it simply today because we're at the end. As you and I said before, we would have more things to say than there would be time to say them. So here we are. But if we come to the end of that, there are times when a person must find the ability to say to themselves, I am a person of value. And that value may come from the expression of their gifts, their service, their willingness to help other people, their code of standards by which they live. It may come from many places. I don't want to give anybody a prescription that there's only one way to feel that you are a valuable person. But I will say, you have to start by casting a vote for yourself. You have to be able to say in the quietness of your own heart, I am a person of value. And if some part of you says, no, you're not, we've already said today a wonderful process for isolating that voice. Who was that? Who said that in my head? Who are you?
they're a bad roommate.
You're a bad roommate. How did you get into my house? We want to extricate that or pull that tooth out in some way, make that voice go away, but then keep coming back. But then we've emphasized heavily today, and I hope it's all right with you, that one of the categories of people who can really do a lot to enable all the rest of us to feel whole and valuable and welcomed and appreciated comes from people who hold positions of leadership. And if that becomes their objective, they'll be like the great companies of the world. We then will take care of the business and the customers, and it will be a beautiful cycle of life. And those people who are leaders can go home thinking, I not only hit my goals, but I enabled all the people in my team to lift themselves to another level today. I think I'll sleep peacefully tonight knowing that.
Well, Jim, I am going to sleep grateful tonight for this conversation, and I can't wait for the next one. I'm so grateful that we got to share this conversation with all of our listeners and that you and I got to learn from each other today. Thank you so much.
I'm honored, brother. And can we do a shout out to our friend Caitlin Johnson, who actually
Oh,
brought us
Caitlin Johnson. Yes,
today?
Caitlin introduced us. We had a wonderful podcast conversation with her a couple months ago. It was amazing. You can check that out and check out Caitlin. She's doing amazing work about helping people realize their goals and dreams through gamifying their life and their process. It is fascinating.
It's been a great honor, Randy, and I hope you'll invite me back someday and we can continue this dialogue.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jim, and thank you everyone for listening. We will see you next time.